welcome to Oh God, What Now, the politics podcast that has full confidence in its presenter, even if it wouldn't use precisely his words. I'm Andrew Harrison, and the government has laid on an absolute feast for us today. After weeks of attempting to commit political suicide by newspaper op-ed, and then encouraging far-right hooligans to protect a cenotaph that is already protected by her responsibility, the police, Suella Braverman has finally been defenestrated. And in a plot twist that nobody could have foreseen, former PM on a gap year David Cameron has been released from his contemplation caravan to take up the reins at the Foreign Office. What is going on? Can Cameron save Sunak's bacon? And how long before Braverman makes the inevitable leadership challenge? We'll be talking about all that and more. Plus, also, after many more councils cancelled their free fireworks display this year, citing tightening budgets and replacing them with ticketed events, are we pricing kids out of access to culture and even to harmless fun? We have a crack panel to deal with these issues. Rachel Cunliffe is Associate Political Editor of The New Statesman. Hello, Rachel.
Hello.
So we'll be talking about the fall of Cruella and the rise of Baron Greensill in a bit. But in other exciting news, Farage and I'm a Celebrity. I mean, this is often like the graveyard of politicians, possibly literally, what with all the black widows that they have down there. What are you expecting?
I'm hoping that he will be forced to eat some inappropriate things. I think we all enjoyed it when Matt Hancock had his stint, and I can't remember, was it cow's vagina, kangaroo penis?
Something like that.
Both.
Weird country.
Yeah, it's kangaroo anus or something.
Kangaroo anus, there we go.
Yes.
But on a slightly more serious point, Matt Hancock did manage to kind of undergo a bit of a relaunch there. His popularity ratings went up the more horrible, humiliating stuff he was put through. And Nigel Farage is not stupid. You can say lots and lots of things about him, but he is absolutely not stupid. So if he's doing this, partly it will be for the money. I think the fee that is reported is £1.5 million.
Supposedly the highest ever.
Yeah, nice work if you can get it. I still wouldn't. But there's also a publicity angle here too, and he will know how best to try and come across. And we've got an election coming up in the next year, possibly sooner than we thought. We'll discuss that later. I interviewed Richard Tice last week, who is leader of Reform UK, which is what the Brexit Party now calls itself, which is Farage's party. And he was really clear that they are going for it and going to try and win as many votes off the Tories as they can. Nigel Farage is still associated with that party. So, yeah, it's going to be Australian jungle political ad, essentially.
So, like, connect with the people by eating kangaroo anus.
It worked for Matt Hancock.
Well, yeah, he was in a pit, wasn't he? He was a kind of his brand was at rock bottom, and Farage kind of doesn't need it. Farage is, for all of his many appalling characteristics, he has this kind of demonic charisma.
He does, but that's why I think it could work for him, because I imagine people will tune in to watch him do horrible, horrendous things and end up going, you know what, I actually quite like him, because he does have that charisma. And at least I imagine that's what the strategy is, whether it will play out or not. I can't watch it because I don't like creepy crawlies and the whole thing makes me go, bleh. But I'll be looking forward to hearing what ordeals he has put through.
It's the continuing end of the purification of British politics. Also joining us is journalist and historian Seth Thevoz. Hi, Seth.
Hello.
So the House of Lords Appointments Committee, or HOLAC, will be cropping up later in the podcast in connection with Baron Greensill. But Times sources say that Mark Littlewood, the head of the IEA think tank and the kind of public champion of Trustonomics, is no longer on Liz Truss's resignation honours list. He's been removed. It seems he hasn't passed vetting. What do we know about this?
I mean, HOLAC are in an interesting place because they really don't like commenting on this at all. The entire peerage system is shrouded in mystery and secrecy. They're very angry about the fact that the last two times they tried aggressively to block someone, it was overruled, firstly with Lord Lebedev and then with Peter Cruddas. But we know that Mark Littlewood's a fairly controversial character. We know, for example, you've had things like undercover journalists recording videos of him boasting of the IEA's level of access to government ministers. Now, I should say the IEA is famously litigious, and unless I insert here their side of the story, we'll doubtless hear from them very soon. But they will argue that, of course, they were cleared by a Charity Commission investigation of any impropriety. The thing about the whole secrecy of HOLAC is that they don't actually have to depend on people being guilty of something. They can just say, well, something doesn't look great, and so on that basis alone, they can veto people from being peers. And so if indeed it's the HOLAC stage that's blocked him, that may well be the sort of thing that's happened.
If it's on the basis of doesn't look great, why isn't the entire Liz Truss resignation list being screwed up and thrown into a waste paper basket on the other side of the room? Because none of it looks great.
Echo question.
Yes, fair enough.
Can I do one Mark Littlewood fun fact? Because I also interviewed him a couple of months ago, and he is planning to write a book on, let me see if I can get this right, it's on how the first 10 movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe are a covert advertisement for free market libertarian
I will
economics.
not have that. He's not having Marvel. No, you take filthy hands
Yeah,
off
because
Marvel.
I know that listeners of this podcast are often
Presenters
quite
of this podcast are
presenters
very...
as well. Well, his point is that you've got Iron Man, who's an innovator, an individual, he's an arms dealer, and
He's
it's
a
the
tech bro
government.
dick who learns how to not be a tech bro dick. That's the whole point.
Well, he would say that the plot point of Captain America: Civil War is should the government regulate superheroes, and often it's the government that's stepping in and being incompetent. I'm just saying that this book is coming, and we should all be ready for it.
I've been ready for this since 1972, Rachel.
You know, I would absolutely pay to go and watch a debate between you and Mark Littlewood specifically on the philosophy of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Welcome to the culture war.
We'll make it happen. Completing the panel, it's Yasmin Serhan, staff writer at Time Magazine. Hello, Yasmin.
Hello.
So obviously we've been talking about ridiculous stuff right up to now, but the horrors of the Israel-Hamas war continue to dominate the front pages. You, however, this week have been speaking to Knesset members about the Israeli government suppressing dissent about the war within Israel. This is the Netanyahu government. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I mean, we've discussed this on previous podcasts, but there's virtually no part of the land that sits between the river and the sea, to use a unpopular phrase, but that geography, there's kind of no bit of it that's doing well right now, whether it's Gaza, which is experiencing, as you just said, the kind of most extreme horrors, to the West Bank, where there's a lot of increasing violence, particularly between Israeli settlers and the Palestinians who live there. And indeed, in Israel proper, what we're seeing now is I think a disconcerting effort to really crack down on particularly anti-war voices. So, and this has particularly been seen among Israel's minority Palestinian or Israeli Arab community. So just last week, some very senior leaders in that community, including a few former Knesset members, were detained for attempting to organize a relatively small kind of vigil protest. And this is effectively done because the Israeli authorities have said that they're not going to allow any sort of anti-war protests, big demonstrations, though some have attempted to be done. But in addition to that, and that I should mention has been done with the Israeli High Court's backing. Some human rights orgs have petitioned to basically get rid of that ban, and the Israeli High Court declined to do so. Also, Israeli lawmakers last week passed an amendment to their counterterrorism legislation, which effectively made it a criminal offense to consume what they call terrorist materials, which human rights organizations have warned could criminalize even passive social media use. And already, since this war began, really, we've seen lots of particularly Palestinian citizens of Israel get arrested because of Facebook posts or WhatsApp statuses. In particular, there was a popular Palestinian singer who posted an image of a Palestinian flag and the caption, "There is no victor but God," and she got arrested. And I think there have been other instances with like Quranic verses being shared and that being sort of interpreted to be a threat or supporting Hamas in some way. So Ada Tumisliman, who's a member of the Knesset for the Hadash party, basically told me that this is an effort not just to kind of criminalize Palestinian identity among the minority Arab population in Israel, but also an attempt to kind of quash any sort of dissent to the war. I think what's interesting, though, is that obviously, before kind of the devastation of October 7th onward began, Israel was consumed by these democracy protests. Yeah. I don't think this issue is getting a massive amount of attention, A, because Gaza. Yeah. But B, because I think you're not, at least I haven't seen a big uproar among Israelis about the lack of kind of protests. And I suspect that may be because actually a majority, or at least a plurality, of Israelis who've been polled support the war effort. So, there's a difficult conversation to be had within Israel right now about the state of its democracy and to what extent these kinds of protests are allowed. I mean, we're having that conversation here in the UK, but I just don't think people have the emotional bandwidth to do that right now.
First up this week, big thanks to the government for scheduling a major sacking before the podcast rather than right afterwards the minute we finish recording, for a change. It is heartbreak for the tofu-eating wokerati as podcast favourite Suella Braverman is fired after a torrid week in which she claimed the police were showing favouritism towards left-wing protesters, described homelessness as a lifestyle choice, and was accused of inciting a far-right mob to invade the cenotaph on Remembrance Day. James cleverly has replaced Braverman as Home Secretary, but if you had a fiver on David Cameron to come back as Foreign Secretary as a Baron, then please let us touch you at the hem of your garments for luck. Rachel, all weekend the talk is whatever Sunak does, he makes it worse for himself. You yourself called it Zugzwang.
Thank you so much for not making me pronounce that word.
I can't pronounce it. I just tried Zugzwang. The chess move where whatever you do, you lose. Can firing Braverman improve his fortunes at all, or did he just have no alternative but to do it?
So it was a really difficult position for Sunak because Braverman is a liability. She keeps going freelance and saying all this stuff. Or I should say she kept going freelance because we can talk in the past tense now, whether that's on the hurricane of migration or living in tents being a lifestyle choice, her comments on homelessness. And she doesn't really go and defend her own comments. She sort of makes these speeches or she'd tweet things, and then it would be other cabinet ministers on the broadcast round who would be asked, and do you support the Home Secretary? And have to do this really difficult balancing act of, the Home Secretary has highlighted a really important problem. I wouldn't necessarily use that language. And this all came to a head with the protest at the weekend. I think the difficult position for Sunak on Friday was if you sack her on Friday after she wrote this op-ed that wasn't cleared with Number 10, accusing the police of bias, if you sack her and then the protest does kick off and descend into violence, particularly the pro-Palestine march ends up in civil disruption, or there's issues with Remembrance and Armistice Day in the cenotaph, then she looks vindicated. Instead, what happened was that march was mostly peaceful. We can have a conversation about some of the language used on it, but was mostly peaceful. And it was the counter-protests, sort of the far right, that turned up, people who were allowed to be near the cenotaph where the pro-Palestine marchers weren't because they were protecting it. They're the ones who got into clashes with police. And that changed the dynamic, I think, a little bit, because then you can point very clearly to a Home Secretary who has made the police's job harder, made the tensions worse, and what she warned about didn't even come to pass. Ergo, yes, here's the moment we can sack her. It's also a helpful moment for him to sack her on a completely different topic, because on Wednesday, the Supreme Court is going to rule on the legality of the government's Rwanda plan. We have no idea which way that's going to go. But if it goes against the government, Suella Braverman has very openly called for the UK to leave the ECHR. Rishi Sunak not so keen on leaving the ECHR. That would have presented her with an opportunity to quit on principle and sort of resign as a martyr to that cause, and now she can't because she's gone.
But she seems to have been angling to get fired for weeks. Sort of everything that has been coming out of her has been sort of designed to step out of line from cabinet policy to run roughshod over cabinet responsibility. Does she want this? Did she want to be defenestrated so that she can kind of be removed from the bounds of the bindings of cabinet and get on with what she really wants, which is to try and become the leader of the Conservative Party?
So that's a really interesting question, and certainly her tweets on. Did you say tweets? Say posts on X? No, yeah. You know what? I'm sticking with tweets. No, they were there.
Call it Twitex.
Twitter. Yeah. Her tweets at the weekend where after there was this clash of protesters, she then went off tweeting basically that she had been right when obviously she hadn't been. That did look like somebody daring the Prime Minister to sack her. But I think we shouldn't underestimate the fact that being Home Secretary gives you a massive platform. People have to listen to what you say when you're the Home Secretary because you're the Home Secretary. If you're a random backbencher who used to be the Home Secretary, the amount that people will listen to your mad comments dramatically reduces. I mean, we talked a lot, I remember, about how Priti Patel would fare on the backbenches, how much trouble she would cause for Rishi Sunak. We've barely heard a peep out of her. So I think giving up that platform is not something that cabinet ministers tend to take lightly, and maybe she was trying to see how far she could go. Equally, maybe she's so used to being able to say whatever she wants and there being zero consequences that she perhaps didn't realise that on this one there might be a line and that she'd crossed it.
I think, as you pointed out in the New Statesman, if you're talking like this while you're in the position of power, it actually shows you quite weak.
Yeah, so that's the other factor in this, which is that even people who agree with her stance on the protest or agree with her on immigration or law and order are a bit fed up by the fact that she keeps drawing attention to all of these issues, and then the government doesn't really do anything on them, or the government failure is highlighted. And actually, it was, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to cite another podcast here, so I'm very, very sorry if I'm breaking the rules, but there's this other podcast with these two guys who used to be sort of fairly significant in politics. This guy, George Osborne, another one, Ed Balls.
Yeah.
You might have heard of them.
Don't know it, yeah.
I don't listen to it most of the time. But George Osborne made a point on that if you are commenting in the column pages of a newspaper, that's a position for people who don't have actual power and actual authority. You're the Home Secretary. You could do something about this, and it actually undermines her position to, rather than ban the protest herself or pass emergency legislation to do it, which is what some were urging her to do, she just went and whinged about it in a newspaper. That doesn't look particularly strong. So I think she was getting criticism from all sides. And to go back to Richard Tice, for example, because I spoke to him last week, he wasn't very impressed with her, even with the rhetoric that she was pumping out.
Seth, Braverman seems to bet on the idea that Palestine support protesters would invade the Senate staff, and the Mail in particular seemed to be gagging for that to happen. And yet, in the event, she actually incited Tommy Robinson and his Stone Island mates to show up. Is it too dark to imagine that that is actually what she did want? She wants the chaos.
I'm loath to say exactly what her intentions were, but I mean, it's very clear where her sympathies lay on all of this. You know, the fact that in the face of two protests, she almost entirely talks to the exclusion of all else, just about one, when there's another protest going on at the same time, which is overwhelmingly violent, and that's very clear. I mean, you see 82 people being arrested on the same street from the far-right protest just in one incident. What's curious is, I mean, I largely agree with what Rachel said, but I think one thing about her resignation is, where I slightly differ, is that I don't think she minds actually resigning at this stage, because she has, having been Home Secretary on her CV now, she's been Home Secretary for the best part of 14 months. That's ticked the box. You know, in this crazy era of politics that we're in, 14 months is actually quite a long time, weirdly enough. And I think she's been the worst Home Secretary we've had since the last time Suella Braverman was Home Secretary. I mean, don't forget that she was sacked by Liz Truss. Of all people.
You got to go some to get sacked by Liz Truss.
And she was sacked for breaching the ministerial code, and then she was reappointed by Rishi Sunak 6 days later. So she's the worst Home Secretary other than Grant Shapps, who managed to not create a total disaster in the 6 days that he held the job.
Yeah. You're a person with a long historical memory. Who was the previous worst Home Secretary? Are we going to go back to, Lord Liverpool or something?
I'd go for something like David Maxwell Fyfe.
Which most people can't even remember. Give us a reason why.
1950s hanger and flogger, just not a particular... He basically tried to string out the death penalty in this country for longer than its natural existence, when a lot of MPs who weren't even particularly liberal were saying, I'm not sure about the whole public executions thing.
Well, if they can bring back David Cameron, I'm sure they can bring back David Maxwell Fyfe. He'd probably do quite well in
reanimating the dead.
Absolutely, yeah. Rachel, the New Conservatives are meeting. The New Conservative claque, the Miriam Cates and her horrible mates, the trad conservative right-wingers, are meeting right now, I think, as we record the podcast, for their reaction to Braverman getting the boot. Is she really the front runner of the hard right, or is she just the best they've got?
Well, the right wing of the party is quite a few different factions. We talk about it like it's one, but it isn't. There's the Liz Truss free marketeer faction who they basically just want tax cuts, and some of them are quite socially liberal. There's the Miriam Cates, Danny Kruger faction, the New Conservatives, who are considered right-wing, but are actually quite more to the left on state intervention and some sort of state support, but have sort of very socially conservative values. And then there are the Brexity lot. And they're all kind of grouped together as being the right of the party, but actually they have a bit of back and forth. The reason for pointing that out is that I don't think there is a kind of cohesive large group that is behind Braverman, because a lot of the Brexit-y types actually would prefer, say, Kemi Badenoch, she's got strong Brexit credentials, but she's seen as serious and not too mad. Whereas, Suella Braverman spoke at the the National Conservatism Conference in May. She was like the headliner there. One of the interventions we talked about, like you wouldn't normally have a cabinet secretary go off and do a speech at a fringe conference, but on a lot of the sort of social conservative stuff, let's encourage people to have lots and lots of babies. That's Miriam Cates' thing. She's kind of not really there. So it's a group of people who all dislike Rishi Sunak for slightly different reasons. And yeah, they're having a meeting at the moment. A couple of weeks ago, we had some reports of the letters going in because he's been Prime Minister for a year. That means they can start putting in letters of no confidence. I had a text today, a WhatsApp from an MP going, this could tip our letters over the line. And you're like, yeah, but you're not really agreed on what the next bit of the plan is. So I think it's a lot of sabre rattling, but the chances of them actually getting together this week and going, yeah, we're going to get rid of Rishi Sunak and here's our plan to install Suella Braverman in the year before an election, I don't see that happening.
I just love your idea of not too mad. Just mad enough. Not too mad, not too crazy.
I'm trying to describe it from their perspective.
Yes.
They do know they don't have to depose a leader every time they get the opportunity, right? Like I get that like recent history would suggest that they would, but I just find it funny
now they've worked out that
that
they can.
Yeah.
It's addictive.
Shall we talk about bringing David Cameron back? We're bringing Cameron back, like Justin Timberlake. Yasmin, how does it look to you that you can just have someone parachuted into a great office of state overnight, and in order to do it, just like make him a baron, bingo, like that, and he's straight in?
I read the push notification like 3 times because I didn't understand. I was completely bewildered. Didn't think it was possible. Learned that it was, and then still kind of came right back around to. You have how many MPs do the Conservatives have?
350.
And of all of them, there wasn't a single person who's been elected and has a constituency.
Fabricant is available. He could have had anything.
And they had 237 peers. So they actually could have chosen from any of those, but they needed to appoint a new one as well.
Yeah, it just struck me as like, A, I didn't have that on my bingo card, and B, it just must be so dire that you've... And what's funny is that he's not, like, there were other former prime ministers on the back benches. He could have gone to any of them.
Are you saying sort of Theresa May would have made more sense because she's an MP?
Well, no, it's more I just didn't know you could do it. And I kind of don't know what it is specifically about Cameron, especially from a foreign policy lens, apart from him being Prime Minister, that makes him particularly suited to the role.
I mean, I've got one suggestion, which is that he won them 2 elections.
Yep, you know what? But
And they've got rid of Boris Johnson, who's the other one.
There's a bigger loss.
He kind of won the elections that don't count because, like, the Brexit bloc of the party doesn't really think that they were real victories because it wasn't really the Tory party.
He's not particularly
loss,
popular anymore, is
This
he?
is a government of an old Wickhamists, with old Carthusians, with old Harrovians. There aren't enough old Etonians, arguably.
The diversity hire.
And so it's ticking that box.
I thought you were talking about Time Lords for a minute then. When you said Etonians, that's what he's talking about. Yeah. But I mean, this is, that question of popularity. I mean, obviously bringing him back certainly shoved Braverman to the sidebar of the headlines. But everybody who supported Brexit hates David Cameron. Everybody who opposed Brexit hates David Cameron because of Brexit. And people who were not around then or couldn't vote then, all they've got to go on is everybody hates David Cameron. So is it necessarily a good idea?
I'm going to speak up in defence of this. I think this actually does make a lot of sense. One, it got the Braverman story, as you said, like down in the headlines. And
yes.
I'm not saying the whole thing was just a dead cat, But I think
Cameron. Dead Dave.
No, but I think if you wanted a really showy kind of appointment, you absolutely got that. Secondly, like, he is a really good communicator as politicians go, and this is a job, Foreign Secretary, which is all about representing Britain on the world stage, having meetings with world leaders, not being an embarrassment. If you look at people who've held that job before, Boris Johnson, an embarrassment in that role. Liz Truss, absolutely an embarrassment in that role. Cameron is a safe pair of hands, and he's someone who I think actually took seriously the idea of politics being a form of public service. And I say that not as somebody who's a massive fan of anything that he did as Prime Minister, but I think he got that. Theresa May is somebody else who got that politics as a public service, and therefore it is an honour to serve your country, and you're not going to use being Foreign Secretary purely as a platform to try and destabilise the current Prime Minister. I'm not sure how many people there are on the current sort of crop of high-profile politicians who you could say that about. He's not going to embarrass Rishi Sunak as Foreign Secretary.
There'll be a way, I'm sure, but the fact that he can't be Prime Minister again kind of helps. He's a busted flush. He's had his go.
I mean, I'm not going to say he can't be Prime Minister again.
Well, anything can happen.
And Yasmin is discovering the British Constitution is weird.
As a friend of mine, commentator David Quansick was just tweeting, "Oh shit, I'm in the cabinet." It just happened. I was walking down the street minding my own business. I have to ask you though, Rachel, did you have to find the sick bag when Ian Dale said that moderate Tories were texting him saying, "Daddy's home"?
Yes, and I am not going to comment further on that because it makes me feel unwell.
It is very odd, isn't it? The psychosexual nature of the Conservative Party.
I also don't think it's true. I think maybe somebody texted him that as a joke and he decided to tweet it, and now it's a thing. I refuse to believe it's a thing. Fake news. Didn't happen.
Fake news. Seth, though, I mean, the ugly smell of the Greensill scandal does hang around Cameron. And I insist that we refer to him as Baron Greensill at all times, like Baron Greenback from Danger Mouse. How could he clear the House of Lords Appointments Committee so quickly? They can't have put him in early, can they, knowing this was going to happen?
Well, Holac has actually complained in the past in some of their public comments about being rushed on this and about being told, you've got 24 hours, we want to make this announcement tomorrow, you've got this long to basically do a Google search. And that's effectively it. They're given a reference from HMRC about candidates' tax affairs, and they're given a reference from the security services. What I wouldn't take for granted is the idea that they are happy about how the consultation that's happened. What we know from the inference around the whole Liz Truss list being monitored is that Holac have been meeting quite recently. So it may well be that Cameron was being nominated at the same time as that. But we don't know whether they were given a fortnight or 24 hours to look over this. What's going to be fascinating to look at this is the register of members' interest. I mean, I think Cameron's register entry is going to be full of extraordinary things. I mean, one of the rather obvious conflicts of interest that comes to mind is he very famously resigned from White's Club because he discovered that it's a men-only club after 25 years as a member, and he made that principled stance, and then when he left the office, he rejoined very, very quickly thereafter. And I only mention it because one of his fellow members happens to be the King, who just appointed him. The King does not like being dragged into constitutional controversies like that.
Good heavens. Well, apart from all this fun, there are a few little sort of tiny minor things to consider, like James Cleverly as Home Secretary. Is he enough of a bastard to be able to be a good Home Secretary?
I mean, I think being Home Secretary turns you into a bastard. And I say that for all parties. I think it's a completely dysfunctional department, the Home Office. It's trying to do too many things. It's got too many different priorities. The stakes are really high. So you have even people who go in there with relatively liberal ideals, like, say, Amber Rudd, end up giving sort of preposterous speeches and clamping down really hard on everything because the default Home Office mindset is to ban it. That said, I think the reason for putting James Cleverly in that role is he's somebody who Rishi Sunak thinks won't cause trouble, like Suella Braverman did, won't use it as a platform to run a de facto leadership campaign, although James Cleverly is tipped as being one of the front runners in the next leadership contest, somebody who could unite the sort of One Nation moderates, and certainly for him, having been Foreign Secretary and not had any major disasters, and then being Home Secretary for a year and not making it worse than she did, that could be good on the CV.
I liked the tweet they put out, which is that James cleverly will stop the boats. But the angle they shot it from made him look like one of those giant robots from Pacific Rim, like he was going to do it personally. He's going to stride out into the channel and just pick up boats and chuck them around. It's astonishing.
The new Marvel character.
New Marvel character.
It's quite surprising the Conservatives haven't tried that yet.
It's a big infrastructure project. And Theresa Coffey's gone. Good news for sewers, bad news for everybody's just going, eh?
Well, Steve Barclay is moved from health to DEFRA, and I'm not sure you could say that the management of the health service has been so stellar that now we can have that expertise in our environment department. Therese Coffey is someone who I actually have a bit of sympathy for, because everyone I know who's worked with her says she's like really, really lovely and just a wonderful, nice person to work with. She's just got a brief where everything's happened to be falling apart on her watch, and the proximity, the closeness with Liz Truss, who's a close ally of Liz Truss, doesn't really help her either. We've also got our 16th housing minister in 10 years. I think that's
all
right.
passionate about housing, as Hannah Fern of this parish pointed out. Every one of them passionate.
Yeah, but not building any. Actually, I feel very sorry for Rachel McLean, who was the one who's just been ousted because she was passionate about building housing. And now I've got Lee Rowley, and I had a spat with him once on Politics Live about building new houses and counting the votes of people who are existing residents over the ones of people who might like a home one day. But yeah, a lot of new people in a lot of posts that are kind of quite important, like health and sorting the sewage crisis and housing.
Yeah. So just to wrap this up, just as a little kind of footnote, where does this leave Sunak?
In number 10 still.
Still, just
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, emptying Larry the Cat's litter tray.
Somebody's got to do it. Now, it's a busy week, but not so busy that there isn't time for another exciting podcast from the House of Podmasters. We've been reimagining our much-loved geopolitics podcast, Doomsday Watch, for a brand new series, and I can now tell you that it's back this very week with a brand new name and a brand new presenter. This Is Not a Drill is the new name for the series, and the new host is friend of the podcast and oh god what now regular Gavin Esler, the phenomenally experienced BBC foreign correspondent and Newsnight presenter. We've got a fantastic set of new episodes and there's even amazing brand new theme music from Paul Hartnell of the legendary electronic band Orbital, who did the music on our first series, and I'm very, very excited about that. I spoke to Gavin about the new series and what we can expect.
It's going to be an exploration of some of the very difficult problems, intractable problems sometimes in our world. We'll be ranging from, do we really have 1 year to save American democracy, or is Trump coming back, to what to do about Ukraine, which the war is still going on, to the centuries old, one could say, troubles in the Middle East and elsewhere. And we'll be talking to the top experts, people on the spot, the ones who help try to solve problems rather than create them.
The first episode of This Is Not a Drill is out on Wednesday. It's out right now for Patreon backers if you want to hear it immediately. And it will come out on the old Doomsday Watch feed, so you don't need to resubscribe. It's just been renamed. If you're not listening, then now's the time to start. Just search This Is Not a Drill on your favourite app. Now, let's choose some heroes and villains. It's time for Hero and Villain of the Week, and the rules are each member of the panel presents a hero and a villain, and I choose the winner. Yasmin, let's start with you.
So my heroes, because I can't really narrow it down to just one, I think would have to be the doctors and nurses who continue to work inside Gaza's remaining hospitals. Obviously, the reports out of those are really distressing, but I've been in touch with at least one of them. And just to hear kind of the conditions they've been working under and the bravery with which they do it is really incredible. And my villain is Douglas Murray, who's makes some really, I think, questionable commentary on Israel and Palestine, which I hasten to guess he couldn't have pointed out on a map before this all kicked off. I could be wrong, but I would check out those comments because they're too bizarre to paraphrase.
Seth, how about you?
My hero with a caveat is Holak for the reasons we've gone into. I think just over Mark Littlewood's non-approval, it seems. My villain is Morgan McSweeney, Labour's Director of Strategy. There's a fascinating story in the Sunday Times about the £730,000 that was raised by Labour Together, an organisation which he ran from, I think, 2017 to 2020, much of which doesn't seem to have been declared or declared on time. And so that for somebody who's going to be running Labour's election campaign, some serious questions about how they resource these sorts of things. And these are the kinds of bits of carelessness that actually could spell real trouble for the next government.
Mm-hmm. Rachel, who are your heroes and villains?
My heroes are the Ohioans United for Reproductive Rights, who last week won a ballot initiative in Ohio to put in the Constitution safeguarding of abortion access. And I think this is incredible. And I also think it's been a year and a half since Roe v. Wade was overturned. The Republicans clearly thought that they could just roll back reproductive rights and that nobody would hold them to account or vote against any of that. And we're seeing sort of state by state people going, no, actually, we quite like reproductive healthcare. But it takes people like that to actually launch it and make it happen. My villain of the week is, to go back to the reshuffle, whoever was running the Conservatives' Twitter account who insisted on announcing all of the new appointments with emojis and like strong arms and fireworks and the language of, I don't follow football, but the language of kind of football transfer season. And I just think like the memification of politics has got to stop.
There's a possibility we maybe talk about the memification of politics later in the week. Interesting. So, all right, very difficult this one. I think the heroes, it's kind of an open and shut case. It's kind of got to be the doctors and nurses in the hospital, because irrespective of what you're thinking about the complex political background, the fact that, there's emphasis placed on one case and on another case in different parts of society, in different parts of the media. I think we'd all agree that working in a hospital with no power and attempting to keep people alive is the definition of heroic. So I'm going to give that to the doctors and nurses in the hospitals in Gaza. And the villains, I think, Rachel, you made a very persuasive case there. We do not want to see, agreement reached, ! Like it's deadline day. We do not want to see the kind of, explosions and punching fists. And also, it's incredibly, how do you do, fellow kids, isn't it? This idea that you can present, cabinet politics as if it's, something that should be surrounded by a cloud of emojis.
Yeah. Can you imagine if they started doing it on TikTok? I'd be just shuddering thinking about it.
Well, I can't, because I'm never on TikTok because I'm too old. So they can do whatever they like. I don't care.
Someone likened it to the Love Island announcements, like when they brought Adam Collard back, like he's back, and like it's David Cameron.
I think it would be so much better if Love Island was announced the way politics used to be. To His Majesty the King is pleased to confirm that such and such has been kicked off the island for not being sexy enough, and like a Dieu et mon droit thing at the top. That'd be much better. As anybody who lives in a city knows, the idea that the fireworks all finish on November the 5th, or bonfire night as it used to be called when I was a kid, is fanciful. They start in about September and they keep going until the new year. Councils across the UK used to put on big bonfire night demonstrations for free. But since the pandemic and the cost of living crisis, they've been slowly disappearing, as have many entertainments and get-togethers that the council used to provide. Since 2010, spending on culture and libraries has been slashed by over 40%. And only two departments have been cut more than culture. They are street cleaning and road maintenance. As local councils get harder pressed for cash, are we at risk of pricing working class kids out of culture and even out of a bit of free fun? Can we remember the first time we saw fireworks? When you weren't in the country, Yasmin. You had your fireworks in the daytime when you can't see them properly. 4th of July.
Wait, really? Oh, no. I mean, we put them on. I think of Disneyland, weirdly. I always associate fireworks with that. Yeah, 4th of July is kind of the classic. But weirdly, I've never... So it's always a sort of thing where I don't know if you can buy them here if it's legal, but in the States, at least, I think in California, you can go and buy fireworks. So, like, people would just buy them and, like, set them off.
Yeah.
You can buy them
here,
you
can.
And you should not be able to, because a lot of people do and do not do it safely.
I was going to say, it's definitely illegal in some places, but my memories of fireworks were, something that you would just go buy and, like, set off, not something that like your community would provide, though obviously that's quite nice.
Like I said, when I was a kid, I used to think it was called bonfire night, as in there is a bomb. I was perpetually disappointed every year. It didn't blow up this time.
Just looking at Parliament every year being like, this will be the year, don't
Just
worry.
in the back garden, really.
That does segue perfectly to my first real memory of fireworks, which is we had some at home, and my cousin threw the cardboard casing of them onto the bonfire as fuel, and we were like, should we do that? Should we not do that? And about 3 minutes later, the bonfire exploded in pink and green flame. We all ran for the house because you should not throw the casings of fireworks onto the bonfire. Who knew? And it was like, it's seared in my memory as this like terrifying but amazing life-death experience.
Yeah. So, Rachel, your colleague Anoush Chakelian at the New Statesman points out that the Tower Hamlets, one of the poorest boroughs in London, has cancelled theirs completely, and the nearest one costs £17 for adults, £11.50 for kids, and £4.50 for the under 10s. This is like more expensive than going to the pictures.
It's really expensive, and I would say like everyone go read Anoush's article, because one of what she's highlighted perfectly is as councils are more and more cash strapped, there's this sort of framing that we can't have community fireworks displays because we need to fix the hole in the road, and obviously the roads are more important than fireworks, but that there used to be this community leisure sense that you could just bring your kids to the firework display and it was a fun night out and it didn't cost anything. And in some of the poorest areas of London, that's just gone, and leisure has become much more of a private pursuit. And no one's saying we shouldn't fix the roads or give that money to social care, but something is being lost and it is really sad.
As a mum, do you find it ruinously costly to get kids these things?
I'm a stepmom, so I'm just gonna.
It's a mum.
Thank you, because lots of people, Miriam Cates would say that it wasn't.
Well, she can shut up, Miriam Cates.
I tell you what, the prices of things for a family of four are absolutely extortionate. We took the kids to the Roman baths at the weekend, and it costs 60 quid for like an hour and a half.
Roman baths is quite high culture, though. We just used to get taken to Blackpool Pleasure Beach, and that was expensive enough.
Well, I'm a classicist, and I feel like it's very important. Maybe that's not the best example, but it was like a thing where I looked at the ticket price and I went, "Oh, okay, we're here now. We're in the queue. There's nothing we can do. I guess we're spending 60 quid on this." It does add up.
Do you find that, like, bonfire night, for instance, like you've got to get in early and get tickets for things that used to, or do you find ways of diverting the kids away from it?
They're young enough still that a sparkler, as Paddington Bear would say, a firework you can hold in the paw, that does the trick. Also, we used to live up by Parliament Hill. It was in walking distance, so you go to the top of the hill and you can just watch everyone else's free fireworks. So that's a piece of cash saving advice. Just find a hill and watch them for free.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of depressing that everything has to be zero sum, doesn't it? Because you can run pretty much any form of municipal expenditure up against, as you say, social care or holes in the road, or cleaning up the leaves or getting the dog poo off the streets, and it will probably fall.
Yeah, and I think this is part of this assault on what we used to call civic pride, and this idea that actually communities would be brought together around these kinds of events. More and more of the remaining events that there are, like sporting events, are privately run rather than being run by the council in this way. And I mean, you talk about the value of these sorts of events to working class culture, but actually it's value is as a cross-class thing. We're talking in London right now, where most of the London boroughs, when they were formed with their boundaries in 1965, the idea was to pair off a rich area and a poor area. And part of the problem in how services have been provided is that you still get this segmentation and two tiers in very many councils. And actually, the value of these sorts of events is they bring people together across boroughs.
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing that really struck me when I moved to London, was that, like, the rich areas and the poor areas are very, very close together, and they're intermingled, whereas elsewhere in the country you tend to have large areas, large suburbs where not much happens, large, very poor areas, and little enclaves of wealth. But it's just not like London, which is a patchwork.
And it's the same sort of salami slicing that sees the funding of public libraries being cut away bit by bit. Everything that we think of as being a communal space, actually, that's a shared facility.
Yeah. I mean, can we blame councils, though? Because there's going to be a £4 billion funding gap, according to I forget the name of the body that represents councils, but they have to make these difficult choices, and it's hard to make a case for let's burn a bunch of stuff for entertainment.
Well, full disclosure, I used to work in local government, and a lot of this is actually the raw deal that they're set by central government saying, well, we control 90% of your funding, and by the way, we're taking away most of it. And they've actually increased their liabilities whilst removing their ability to pay for it.
And we have seen a number of councils of all different political persuasions going bankrupt or going close to bankruptcy. And I think it is exactly that. There are certain things that councils are legally mandated to provide, and there is a certain amount of funding they get, and there is a massive gap between the two. And we've just had kind of 10 years of not really talking about that.
We've also had a long period of many of the councils have gone bankrupt because they've gone into unwise kind of commercial housing ventures and, entered the private market and simply not been able to handle it.
Yeah, but again, some of that is because they've been given very little choice by central government, who's taken away their budget and then said, you need to raise this sum of money, and we are strongly encouraging you to commercialise your services, strongly encouraging you to develop, for example, conferencing hotels and use the revenue for that to replace council tax.
Should we really be burning stuff in today's modern carbon-concerned world? Should we be doing those drone things like the Flying Captain Tom they did on New Year's Eve?
It was the 4th of July celebrations, I think for the first time in 10 years in Los Angeles. It was a drone display, which I can't imagine that drones are necessarily more affordable than fireworks, but they do last longer, and they don't scare pets.
I was going to say, as a pet owner, fireworks, I can love looking at them and love the smell, because the smell is really evocative, takes you right back, while also being like, there are a lot of dogs and cats that are really, really sad tonight. But that's one reason that I think I would prefer there to be public ones that people can go to either for free or for very inexpensive amounts, rather than people setting them off in their gardens and terrifying animals at all hours, and also making quite dangerous decisions, as my family did back then.
Yeah, bring in the drones.
Do you remember the Hannaford Parish Council thing on Zoom from a couple of years ago? You have no authority here, Jackie Weaver. There was some fascinating write-ups on that from people who actually went and stayed in Hannaford for long periods of time to try and understand what on earth all this was about. And at the foot of it was actually the role of councils on this, and it was mainly around Christmas decorations and fireworks displays, and it was differing attitudes towards, we want lower taxes and we don't believe the council should be doing this kind of thing or indeed should exist, versus people saying this is actually something that brings our community together. So I mention this because tempers really flare about this kind of stuff. It matters.
Well, it's the middle of November, so we'll be into the war on Christmas pretty soon. And why have you got a Winterval celebration and not a Christmas celebration? So,
well, Catherine Birbalsingh has already gone to war on various Christmas adverts. One of them, she's very upset that some people don't like certain aspects of Christmas, and so in the advert are burning them. One of them, she's upset because there's no dad in the advert, and that means dad doesn't exist. And on that, I'm actually with her in that I think like Christmas adverts that show the mom doing literally everything and dad isn't really around, I think that we should move on a bit from that. But also, it's a Christmas advert. There's so much in the world to actually be upset about. You don't have to be upset about a Christmas advert.
I did like the rejoinder to Catherine Birbalsingh, which was, oh, well, you'd probably like an ad with two dads in it, wouldn't you? And she just went, no. We've reached the end of the show, so it's time for escape routes. What are the cosy blankets of culture that we've been using this week to distract ourselves from the horrible world that surrounds us? Seth?
It might surprise you, I've been reading a book by a Tory peer, but I've been really enjoying Philip Norton, Lord Norton of Louth's book on the 1922 committee. It's always a bad sign when people know who the 1922 committee are, but I think we've had ample reason for that. And one of the things I'm enjoying about the sort of rock star treatment this book has been getting is that it's a very dry, comprehensive academic monograph, but really very good.
Right, okay, because the 1922 committee's having a moment. It's probably going to have another moment as soon as Braverman gets hooked into it. Rachel, what's your cultural moment?
You know what my cultural moment is going to be.
Would it be when you went to see Mamma Mia the Party at the O2 and I ran into you in the tube station because I did see the Chemical Brothers?
Yes, this is taking my mother for her birthday to Mamma Mia the Party, which is an immersive theatrical ABBA-themed experience. That's really the only way to describe it. but we were leaving the O2 Centre at the exact same time as your Chemical Brothers gig was coming out, and we ended up at North Greenwich Station with hundreds, if not thousands, of possibly slightly intoxicated, not you obviously, but I think some of your
Straight
fellow
as a die,
revellers
yes.
a little bit were, and my mother was a bit confused by the whole thing as to where all these people had come from and why their eyes were looking that way. But Mamma Mia the Party is absolutely just joyful and wonderful and ridiculous, totally ridiculous, and very worth it.
Well, I had a bit of a chat with your dad, and he seemed very intrigued at the full-on sensory assault that is the Chemical Brothers Acid House Light Show, so we may be going to see the next one.
I just don't think that the Chemical Brothers Acid House Light Show is really my dad's thing, but maybe I'm wrong.
You never know. You never know. Yasmin, how about you?
I'm just going to American cultural moment. It's Thanksgiving coming up, so I have a litany of Friendsgivings, really. So the only thing I'll be reading are sweet potato and marshmallow recipes, which if you haven't tried, it sounds ridiculous. It's really, really good.
Are you turkeyed out yet?
I haven't had any yet. I'm sure I will be. I have a few Friendsgivings lined up, so.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If you have turkey for Thanksgiving, what do you have for Christmas?
It's turkey again.
Turkey again.
Yeah, and that's why I actually I go strictly anti-turkey. I just think it's the driest meat. It's not enjoyable, but
I don't like turkey either.
Yeah.
Is this going to be like the Fawlty Towers thing of Duck Dundee, two extremely different ways?
I mean, yeah, I've never been the type to like deep fry my turkey. One of the Friendsgivings I'm going to will be hosted by a vegetarian and vegan friend, so there is a bit of diversity in the culinary sort of aspect, but yeah.
Yeah, sort of put turducken or whatever it's called.
Whatever, yeah.
Vegan turkey.
I'll eat it. Tis the season.
Well, my cultural moment is I've got a brand new favourite artist. And she's called Tisha, T-S-H-A. And funnily enough, she was supporting the Chemical Brothers.
Was she?
She was. She was on stage. And she plays electronic music, which sounds a bit like, if listeners know, bonobo. She's from Fareham, near Portsmouth. Her music is just a combination of, extremely kind of mind-massaging house music and great big bangers. But most importantly, the thing that she seems most inspired by is a tune called Belfast by Orbital, who I've already mentioned in this podcast, which is renowned as one of the most lovely and kind of elevating pieces of electronic music of the past 30 years. And it sounds like this young woman has been marinated in it since youth. So she's great. And her album is called Capricorn Sun. It came out about a year ago. And I think she's absolutely wonderful. So I would recommend it enormously. And that is the end of the Tuesday edition of Oh God, What Now? Thank you, Yasmin.
Thanks.
Thank you, Seth.
Cheers.
And thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Oh God, What Now? We'll be back on Friday or Thursday if you're a Patreon backer. Thank you to everybody who's helped us sell out our Comedy Store gig on the 13th of December. All tickets are now sold. But if you missed out on tickets, we're going to be streaming it to our Patreon backers. We're going to be setting that up very shortly. So you can, if you're not in that London, and why would you be, you can watch it live streaming via Zoom. And also there'll be a recording afterwards. So just search Patreon Oh God, What Now podcast to find out how to sign up and to watch that. Thanks for listening to Oh God, What Now? We'll see you next time.